up, Taiwan? I'm Reece Ayers with news from here in Taiwan and around the world. A new poll from a US-based think tank shows that many Americans believe Taiwan should be spending more on its own defense. It comes as Taiwan just announced it would spend a record amount on its military. Jaime Okan reports.
Taiwan is set to spend roughly $20 billion on its defense next year. That's the most in the country's history. But analysts from the US, the largest provider of military aid and weapon systems to Taiwan, says it needs to do more. By law, the US is obligated to help Taiwan boost its defense as it faces the threat of invasion from China. But whether the US would send its own troops to defend Taiwan is still a question. A new poll from conservative U.S. think tank Defense Priorities reveals that 37% of U.S. citizens think the U.S. should not come to Taiwan's aid in the event of a war. That's compared to 33% who are neutral, and 30% who say the U.S. should send troops, regardless of the consequences. The survey also shows that 66% of Americans think the U.S. should require Taiwan to invest more in its defense as a prerequisite for any commitment by the U.S. to defend the country. Most defense experts argue for Taiwan to develop an asymmetric strategy, using smaller and cheaper weapons, which they say is the best way to defend itself.
And if you only have all of your money spent on a couple of jets, a couple of ships, and some ground forces that aren't ready to really fight in the streets, then the China's going to be able to take out Taiwan before the U.S. shows up. So the idea of asymmetry is if you're the weaker actor, buy large numbers of cheap things like drones and naval mines that are inexpensive and you can lose a lot of them and there'll still be enough of them to impose unacceptably high costs.
But Taiwan's defense ministry has traditionally focused on larger, more expensive systems like fighter jets and tanks, which take up a large portion of the country's budget. But since that budget is limited, it likely can't afford to have both.
It wants to have, shiny platforms as well as the asymmetric weapons. And so if you want to have all of it and you're not going to make difficult trade-offs, again, you're going to need to have a much larger budget. So you want to have it all, but the defense spending doesn't really allow you to have it all. And I think that that's a lot of the, frustration or maybe bewilderment from some observers.
With the increase in military spending, Taiwan is now looking to invest more in drones and missiles, which could be cheaper and potentially be made in Taiwan. A recent purchase of about 1,000 drones from the U.S. shows that Taiwan is trying to break out of its traditional spending habits.
Again, I think it all comes back to where can Taiwan really get the most bang for its buck, whether it's indigenous or acquired from the U.S., and what things are mobile and lethal and can operate in degraded conditions.
Many observers agree that Taiwan's record defense spending is a step in the right direction. But given the threat Taiwan faces from China, there are still concerns there's more to do. Not only spending more, but spending smarter. Devin Tai and Jaime Okan for TaiwanPlus.
Algerian boxer Imane Khelif has won gold at the Paris Olympics amid controversy over her gender. She beat young Leu by an unanimous decision in the women's 66-kilogram category to claim the top prize. Khelif and Taiwanese boxer Leu Ting have been the focus of international attention after failing a so-called gender eligibility test from the now discredited International Boxing Association. The International Olympic Committee has upheld both athletes' right to compete. Taiwan's sports administration is considering a lawsuit against the association. Taiwan's Leu Ting is up for at least a silver medal at the Paris Olympics as she competes in the women's boxing final. But her Olympic run has been marred by questions over her gender. The controversy started after she failed an undisclosed test by the International Boxing Association in 2023. And despite Lin being cleared to compete by the Olympics Commission this year, it's done little to dispel speculation about her eligibility. To find out more about sex testing in sports, Gino Lopez spoke to Shane Heffernan, a senior lecturer of sports and exercise sciences at Swansea University in the UK.
The International Boxing Association, or IBA, this week tried to shed light on the sex test that Leu Massacre allegedly failed back in 2023. What did they say?
Well, I guess the press conference that the IBA had during the week kind of revealed as much as they were willing to reveal, which was very little, about the nature of the test. And certainly the IOC's position on that is that they don't necessarily believe what they've been told, given the controversies around the particular organization and the interactions that organization has had with the Olympics recently.
Multiple media have speculated that these athletes may have differences in sexual development, or DSD. With this, how effective is sex testing in determining who is eligible to compete in a sport's men's or women's category?
So that would depend on the eligibility criteria that we're specifically talking about. So, for example, if the eligibility criteria was the presence of a chromosome makes you ineligible, then that test is relatively easy to conduct. There are other versions of this type of test where you look for a specific genomic region called the SRY gene, certainly individuals with a DSD, which, by the way, for the record, we certainly do not know that these two athletes have. It would depend on what the organization in question determines as the eligibility criteria. If the question is whether DSD athletes have an advantage or not, there's zero information that it confers or denies the presence of an advantage in DSD athletes.
Amidst these different standards of sex testing across different sports organizations, what steps must the IOC take in order to avoid this kind of controversy in the future?
Previously, the IOC used to carry out sex testing. I think that was kind of eradicated in the 2000s. And certainly the IOC's criteria in this case is the athlete passport and the declaration of the athletes themselves. So I guess the fundamental question is, should DSD athletes be eligible to compete in the female category? If they were to be DSD individuals, it wouldn't matter for the IOC anyway. So what the IOC could do, I suppose, in future is to kind of be a bit more stringent on their eligibility policy and use the best available evidence to determine those policies.
That was Gino Lopez speaking with Shane Heffernan from Swansea University. Team Taiwan has finished 6th in women's 71-kilogram weightlifting and is still waiting placement in the women's golf tournament. Weightlifter Chen Wenhui completed 2 out of 6 lifts, finishing with a total score of 236 kilos. Chen expressed regret that she couldn't display her full strength at the event. In women's golf, 2 Taiwanese athletes are still in the running after the 3rd round, with Chen Peiyun currently ranked 24th and Xu Weiling in 17th place. They will both compete in the final on Saturday. Japan has struck gold at the first ever women's breaking event at the Olympics. Japanese B-girl Ami Yuasa outdanced Lithuania's Dominika Banevek to take the top prize, with China's Liu Qingyi taking bronze. This year marks the first time breaking, also known as breakdancing, has featured in the Olympics. It could also be its last, as the event has already been dropped from the 2028 Los Angeles roster. A deadly plane crash near Sao Paulo, Brazil, has killed all 61 people on board. The cause of the crash is not yet known, and victims' families are calling for more information. Chris Gorin has the story.
The tragic moment caught on tape when a passenger plane carrying 61 people crashed northwest of Sao Paulo, Brazil. No one on board survived. Footage and testimony from bystanders arriving early on the scene show the plane crashed into a residential area.
Na hora que eu vi o barulho do avião caindo, eu olhei pela janela de casa e vi no momento que ele caiu. Do jeito que ele caiu, eu já saí correndo de casa e fui ver onde que ele caiu. Eu vi que ele tinha caído numa casa de casal de senhores, que é bem conhecido aqui na capela. Assim, eu apavorado, sem saber o que fazer, muito nervoso, eu pulei o muro.
Flight tracking data shows the Voipass Airlines flight taking off from the city of Cascavel, headed towards Sao Paulo. But around 80 kilometers from its destination, it suddenly veered off course. The investigation is still in its early phase, but authorities say they received no emergency reports from the plane before it crashed.
É tudo prematuro dizer, mas o que nós temos até agora é que não houve, por parte da aeronave, comunicação com os órgãos de controle de que haveria uma emergência, né? Nós temos o compromisso de entrega do relatório final ostensivo para a sociedade sempre no menor tempo possível.
Families of the victims are desperate for news and say the airline has offered little information, including a list of passengers.
Tenho muitos conhecidos que eu ainda não consigo confirmar. A maioria das pessoas que estão aqui, a gente não consegue ter a certeza e muita gente nem caiu a ficha. Então tem ali pessoas com esposa, mãe, filho, mas ninguém caiu a ficha porque ninguém teve acesso a essa lista. Eu acho que só vai cair a ficha e falar, eu tenho um parente ou um amigo, a hora que a gente conseguir ver essa lista.
The investigation continues, but victims' families and the country itself are still trying to process the tragedy. Imane and Chris Gorin for TaiwanPlus.
A Taiwan-owned cargo ship has exploded at a port in eastern China. Surveillance footage captured the blast. Taiwanese shipping firm Yangming Marine Transport Corporation has confirmed that one of its ships caught fire at the port in Ningbo in China's Zhejiang province. No casualties or injuries have been reported so far. The head of Philippines news site Rappler has welcomed a court decision overturning a government move to shut down the independent outlet.
This court decision, the latest in a string of court victories for Rappler, is a much-needed reminder that the mission of journalism can thrive, even in the line of fire, to speak truth to power, to hold the line, to build a better world.
Nobel laureate Maria Ressa called the ruling a vindication. Rappler often publishes critical reports on public and political figures, including former Philippines President Rodrigo Duterte. In 2018, the country's Securities and Exchange Commission took away the outlet's operating license over claims it violated foreign equity restrictions. The site was allowed to keep operating despite the shutdown order. Relatives of Vietnamese refugees killed near a Taiwan Gov't island in 1987 are in Taiwan to call for their lost family members to be reburied. Though the full facts around what happened are not known, these relatives say they're not here out of anger, but to ensure dignity for those they lost. Louise has the story.
It's over 37 years since soldiers on the Taiwan Gov't island of Leu opened fire on a boat full of Vietnamese refugees. The military says 20 people died, including women and children, but relatives of those killed say the number was actually 24. This sensitive island, just kilometres from the Chinese coast, was then closed off to outsiders. But even under the rules of the day, the soldiers stationed there were supposed to arrest and deport intruders, not attack them. Those responsible for the killings were court-martialed, and the military has offered an apology. But questions remain about the full facts of the incident. Now, relatives of those killed are at the site of the massacre, accompanied by military personnel. They say they want closure and a dignified reburial for those who died.
Tôi không đến đây để nhằm mục đích lên án chính phủ hoặc quy trách nhiệm cho bất kỳ cá nhân nào trong vụ án này. Tôi tin chắc rằng chính phủ Đài Loan và nhân dân Đài Loan sẽ có hành động cụ thể để an ủi những nạn nhân trong vụ án này.
One member of Taiwan's government watchdog, Gov't, says that's not enough.
我觉得家属有权利要求真相，国王不能够在这个6个月、半年内他能够再提出一个行政调查报告。
They say a new look into the killings is the way to answer lingering questions and offer closure to the relatives of those who lost their lives. Luffy Lee, John Van Trieste and Louise for TaiwanPlus.
Thank you for watching What's Up Taiwan. Finally, we end with moving scenes of people from Maui entering the waters off Lahaina to honour the more than 100 lives lost in last year's devastating wildfire. I'm Reece. Take care and see you next time.